Something was said at Davos 2023 this year that has been completely overlooked by everyone. And this little piece of information essentially created this rabbit hole that one of my community members has gone down and produced some incredible research. Stick around for the whole video. We're going to go over exactly what's going to be happening with relation to regulation in cryptocurrency across the world. And we'll also be discussing the deadlines that are in place for utility to be at full force. So if you're someone who's looking for short-term gains from XRP, this might be a video to watch the whole way through. This information was submitted to me by Stephen in Geelong, Australia. Thank you so much for this work and the detail that you've gone into. I know exactly how hard it is to string these things together, but you've done an amazing job. And I urge anyone else in the community, if you come across things, please do send them to me. The best place to send them to me is in the Discord. The link to the Discord is below. So let's start with the clip that spurred on this whole rabbit hole and tells us so much information in such a small amount of time that ultimately gives us the exact roadmap for regulation in cryptocurrency and also what that means for XRP. Let's play the video.
Many of these crypto assets are offered from places that I would call sunny places for shady people.
Can you give an example?
Well, I think we all know the kind of locations that we're talking about. So we need to have a global framework to regulate this. It doesn't make sense to just have national approaches. I think this is truly global, global in nature. And so we have been working concretely, and then I'll stop, on updating our regulations on global stablecoin arrangements and coming forward with a new set of recommendations for what we call unbacked crypto assets or other crypto assets. They are now in the open for consultation. So we are looking forward very much for sort of the responses.
It's the first pitch of the panel, people.
Yeah, and then we hope to finalize these two sets of recommendations by the summer of this year.
So what we heard there was actually a lot of information. You can go back and watch it again, but I'm going to try and explain it myself here. The second thing he started talking about was a deadline. And the deadline was summer this year. Summer 2023. What is that deadline for? Well, it's actually for crypto assets, which they refer to them as crypto assets, not cryptocurrencies or digital assets, crypto assets, to be submitted to be part of the regulation process that they're going to start establishing. Also, further down the rabbit hole, we actually have deadline for these crypto assets to be working within the banks fully interoperable, which leads us to think that's the utility moment, right? We actually have a deadline for that, but that's later on in the rabbit hole. So he says we need to have a global framework and it can't operate from country to country. The video then clips over to Brad Garlinghouse, who sat right next to him, who basically nods his head, right? This is saying that going country to country for regulation, just looking at the US for regulation, just looking at the UK for regulation, isn't going to do anything. There needs to be a global framework for regulation that all countries can operate within, so that these assets, these utility assets, can be used at full force around the world. And so who is this Klaas Knot? Who is he to talk about this? Well, Klaas Knot writes and sometimes speaks on behalf of the Bank of International Settlements, and so is incredibly well informed about the operation and how things happen in policy for the Bank of International Settlements and all of the entities that kind of feed into it. This guy has a very high level view of what's going on. So if we're talking about having an agnostic bridge currency in our XRP, for example, you also need a framework of law, of regulation that is also agnostic. Having it just in the US, just in the UK, wherever it is, doesn't actually really matter. Countries will have their own laws, but ultimately the use of these agnostic assets have to fall under a different regulatory framework. And the entity that puts that framework in place has to be impartial, Bank of International Settlements, and has to be the intermediary between all the central banks, the Bank of International Settlements. They tick 2 out of 2 boxes for an entity that could actually put in place a framework for regulation globally. And this is all done within the Basel framework. And I'm going to read out the definition of the Basel framework from the BIS website. The Basel framework is the full set of standards of the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, which is the primary global standard setter for prudential regulation of banks. These are the standards the Basel Committee put in place, looking out for all of the banks. So when they put policy in place, they are acting as that intermediary to put through policies and standards for the banks to follow. And within that document, this is where it gets really juicy. And I'm sorry if this is be a long video, but arguably one of the most informative videos that I'll ever put out. There's a document called the Prudential Treatment of Crypto Asset Exposures. And in this document, they talk about all of the requirements a crypto asset has to meet in order to get one of two categorizations. And in the document, they refer to them as Group 1 crypto assets and Group 2 crypto assets. What you're really interested in is, yeah, what about my XRP, right? What category is my XRP? Group 1 crypto assets are subject to capital requirements based on the risk weights of underlying exposures as set out in the existing Basel framework. We're going to go into that in a second. Group 2 crypto assets are those that fail to meet any of the classification conditions, and as a result, they pose an additional and higher risk compared to Group 1 crypto assets, and consequently are subject to newly prescribed conservative capital treatment. And a little bit further down, Group 2 includes all unbacked crypto assets. Unbacked. How many crypto assets are unbacked right now? Basically all of them. Which ones have we had talks about being backed in the near future? Keep that train of thought. This document also goes into the regulations surrounding custodial assets, assets that can be taken into custody by banks. But that's a whole nother video. But here's where it gets very, very interesting. This framework also requires the token or the crypto asset to be used has to be not only stable, but it also has to be redeemable, wait for this, for a predefined amount of a reference asset or assets. For example, $1 or 1 ounce of gold, or cash equal to the current market value of the reference asset, for example, US dollar value of 1 ounce of gold. Essentially saying that if an asset goes in to a Group 1 classification, it must be backed by another asset. And the asset they're using as an example in this document has been gold. The value of the reference asset, which is gold, which 1 unit of the crypto asset is designed to be redeemable, is referred to as the peg value. Now the peg value, the way in which this gets pegged is actually decided on by central banks. So the top guys at central banks all get together and decide the peg value. But what this Bank of International Settlements framework for regulating and controlling this whole system says, if you're going to use a crypto asset, it has to be backed by gold. Pair that with the fact that banks have been accumulating gold like nobody's business. I wonder why. And even last year, this article on Reuters says central banks bought the most gold on record last year. They've been positioning themselves for a crypto asset to be a Group 1 asset to be pegged to gold. A gold-backed agnostic currency is coming. And I want you to think about who that's going to be. But let's go even further. Another one of the requirements for an asset to be a Group 1 crypto asset is that it must be interoperable. On page 16 of the Central Bank Digital Currencies Foundational Principles and Core Features document from the Bank of International Settlements, it says right there and then, the system needs to offer sufficient interaction mechanisms with the private sector digital payment systems and arrangements to allow for easy flow of funds between systems. Then on page 12, it says CBD systems will never enter a crowded field of domestic payment systems, and interoperability can enable complementarity and coexistence. For cross-border payments, closed-loop systems, for example, global stablecoins, can potentially offer some efficiencies, but only if they interoperate with others. Common international standards, for example, ISO 222. And then even further down on that document, on page 19, it says common data standards has to be interoperable with common data standards, most notably ISO 222. And then on another document on the BIS, it says the central bank digital currencies for cross-border payments. Says that the message standard, example ISO 222, adopted by the interlinkage would act to harmonize standards across systems. And on the same document, a little bit further down on page 33, it says focus area D for this framework is to increase data quality and straight-through processing by enhancing data and market practices. Number 14, adopt harmonized versions of ISO 222 for message formats, promoting the adoption of common message formats such as a harmonized version of ISO 222 and the common rules of mapping or converting data between different data formats. And then Swift talks about interoperability, talking about how CBDCs need to be interoperable, and there's 5 things we need to be focusing on. Number 4 in this list is the simplicity required to scaling global CBDC transactions. And in here it says, and there will be no need to invent new ways of ensuring security, compliance, and authentication and tracking either. We're leveraging the ISO 20022 standard to ensure that CBD transactions carry rich, standardized payment data. This is a document from Swift about interoperability, talking about ISO 222. And then we go over to Ripple. And Ripple is on the Registration Management Group standards body. Everything related to ISO 222. And then in a final Bank of International Settlements document that we're talking about here, options for access to and interoperability of CBDCs for cross-border payments. Right down here on page 18, 3.2, and that first bullet point, it says, hence, compatibility might be achieved, for example, through the use of messaging standards and data formats such as ISO. And it says further down on page 50, interoperability across these systems is achieved through ISO messaging. This form of integration is compatible with existing core banking systems and back office processes of commercial banks and central banks. Now, if that doesn't show you that the BIS is requiring certain things of a certain asset in order for it to fulfill the regulations and the standards that they have put in place. I mean, they're looking for interoperability. XRP, check. They're looking for an entity that actually would jump through the regulatory hoops. Check, that's Ripple again. It needs to be agnostic. Yes, it's an agnostic bridge currency, and it needs to be backed by gold so it can be stable. Now, what was XRP designed to be? It was designed to be stable. It's designed to be backed. And from this information, it seems like we might just be getting that. Now, with all of that criteria put into place, I want you to consider what other assets are going to fall within Group 1. Well, they have to be ISO interoperable. That narrows it down a little bit, doesn't it, right? If they're going to be a Group 1B asset, they have to be stable. We know one that is designed to be stable, and that's XRP. But let's say it's a 1A category. A 1A category means you can tokenize physical assets, right? Well, Algorand is doing that with gold. So when you think of the ISO interoperable assets, we think of all of those ones that we talk about on this channel: XDC, XLM, IOTA, Algorand, HBAR, and Quant. These are the assets that are going to be a Group 1 asset. And who knows, if they actually have the mechanism to be stable and they can be backed by a physical asset like gold or silver or whatever it is, then that's a hurdle we get over at that point, right? And I know this video has gone on quite a while, but we're not even scratching the surface here. The big piece of information that you've been waiting for is actually the deadline for all of these things to start happening. I'm going to tell you the deadline based on this document, the Prudential Treatment of Crypto Asset Exposures, on the BIS website, and then I'm going to explain what that means for us as XRP holders. This document sets out the final standard which the committee has agreed to implement by the 1st of January 2025. The text will be incorporated into the consolidated Basel framework shortly. That's the summer this year. When it says incorporated and into the consolidated Basel framework shortly, that's summer 2023. So it'd be consolidated into the Basel framework, and the deadline for everyone to agree, all the banks to be actually using the asset that is backed, that is interoperable, is 1st of January 2025. Now, what did we talk about previously about retail CBDCs? The absolute earliest a retail CBDC could actually happen is when there is a stable wholesale CBDC. What have we been talking about here? We've been talking about how they're going to stabilize the asset in question, we believe that to be XRP, and back it or peg it to gold. That's what they're saying. So if the deadline for that backing and that stable priced XRP is the 1st of January 2025, and the earliest retail CBDCs could happen has already been talked about as being 2025, the timelines match incredibly here. So here's how I see it playing out, right? I see from this summer, we start getting new documents published. They've updated and consolidated the Basel framework to include the crypto assets. Then from this summer all the way up to January the 1st, 2025, we essentially have that pegging, that backing process. Now, do I see this as being all at once or gradual? This is up to anyone to decide, right? We'll have from summer 2023 to the 1st of January 2025 to basically see how this is going to play out, which we had no choice in the matter anyway, but at least now we've got some insight into how long these things might take. So if they're going to implement it by the 1st of January 2025, that means the asset in question, the Group A assets, have to be decided on. They have to be interoperable using ISO standards, has to be stabilized by its backing with a different asset, and the two examples they gave were gold, and that all has to be done by January the 1st, 2025. At which point, the retail CBDCs basically can get their go-ahead and say, yes, that's the asset being used by banks. Now let's use that stable price that XRP has been set at in order to have £10 in physical cash directly correlate to £10 in retail CBDC. It makes perfect sense. The timeline is here perfectly. And then the retail CBDC rolls out starting anywhere from 2025 all the way up to 2029, 2030. What these documents have shown to us is the importance of the ISO tokens. That is undeniable, that's across the board. We know that our precious XRP and those other ISO 222 related tokens are in that category. We know one of them, at the very least, being XRP, must be stable to work. And we know the crypto assets that are going to be used are going to be Group 1 crypto assets, specifically Group 1B, if we're talking about from the stability standpoint. Now I seriously want you to look out into the internet. Try to find another asset, another crypto asset that meets all the requirements to be a Group 1B asset. Or even for that matter, other tokens that could be a Group 1 asset. All the other assets will not be treated with the regulatory framework required to initiate this globally. There will be a global law about cryptocurrencies, and there are a chosen few, and you know exactly what they are. Thank you again for this incredible research from Stephen. I mean, wow. Seriously, wow. I'm sure there's things I've missed here because there's so much that goes into it. And not only that, you thought it couldn't get any better. Well, there is actually a roadmap for regulation set out by the ICMA group that shows you exactly what's happening from a global standpoint, the EU standpoint, and a national standpoint. And you can see right here, 2025, on this roadmap for regulation, for fintech regulation, it says in 2025, the Basel Committee, GHOS, agreed the implementation of prudential treatment of banks' crypto assets by the 1st of January. That is straight talking about the document that I've just been reading from, the prudential treatment of banks from the Bank of International Settlements. That is put into place on January the 1st, 2025. And then it also says FSB with SSBs to review implementation and of recommendations for the regulation, supervision, and oversight of crypto asset activities and markets by the end of 2025. So 2025, from start to finish, is going to be wild for crypto regulation. But the deadline is the 1st of January. We can also see, going back in time, that in 2024, the Basel Committee are to publish a report on the bank and supervisory implications of ongoing digitization of finance. This includes AI, ML, big data, government structures, all of that by the end of 2024. We also see EU regulations in here, and also 2023, which is going to be a whole nother video. We're going to discuss all of the things that are coming in fintech regulation in 2023 in an upcoming video. This is incredible news for us. We have a timeline, and I don't think anyone else has really discovered this on YouTube yet. With that said, stay emotionless, and I'll see you in the next one.